Tom, how are you?
Hey, good to meet you, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Man, I know that you guys are busy over at Judicial Watch. Now, I know that you've been trying to get a number of things done here, but apparently now the Biden Department of Administration, I should say the Department of Justice, has opposed your request that the court unsealed the affidavit. I got to tell you, as a guy that's obviously, as a talk show host, been following all of this, the president himself, the guy who this, I would say, unnecessary raid was perpetuated upon, he even says unsealed the affidavit. But the Biden administration, the DOJ, won't, because they say they are protecting witnesses and that it would be a matter of national security. What say you?
Well, they have a crime they're investigating, right, or allegedly. Yeah. And, obviously there's the government interest in making sure they can do that, but also there's a public interest in transparency in this unprecedented and controversial raid on Trump's home. And, it's the government's position that they should be able to do this extraordinary act, which I think is corrupt. But either way, it's extraordinary. Without telling the American people why they're doing it. And I'm sorry, but if you're going to go down this path, we need accountability and transparency. And you don't get to raid a former president's home and tell the people, well, we can't tell you why we're doing it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it just seems so ridiculous. Here we are. He's a former president, and he is more than likely going to be President Biden's opponent in the next election, and you're telling me that they're not going to tell the American people, what they have in the affidavit or any justification for what they did. And, the thing that I find so fascinating about all this, Tom, is the FBI, it's like, they've got their palms to the sky and they've got their shoulders to the ears, and they're saying, why don't you trust us?
And it's not just the FBI, it's the Justice Department. So both agencies have a demonstrated record of abusing their authorities, lying to the courts, and unfairly and maliciously targeting President Trump, then candidate Trump, and then he's obviously president, and now the former president. So there's no reason to give them the benefit of the doubt. And just based on what has been public, the idea that they would be raiding this man's home over whether records are presidential records, or over something that's in significant dispute, whether records are classified. We've litigated this issue before, Dan, and we lost because we tried to make the argument that the Justice Department is making. And the Justice Department said, you can't make that argument. And the court said, look, the archives can't get behind a president's decision as to whether to designate records as personal or presidential. And the government's position, they told the court, they said, this was tape recordings that Bill Clinton had that recorded him talking to foreign leaders and members of Congress. And the government's position, he has it, so we presume that they're still they're personal. He kept them in his sock drawer. So there's one rule for Bill Clinton, which is the president deserves some protection and has prerogatives in terms of what he designates as classified or personal or versus presidential, et cetera. And of course, there are new rules for President Trump. And that whole scenario I just gave you tells you why this attack on Trump is so political.
Well, yeah. Now, Tom, let me ask you, what does it say? A lot of people are making hay about, and I probably would be one of them, when they say, well, the FBI, they really overreached, especially when they took Trump's passports. Does that say anything to you about the fact that maybe I think we both agree they way overstepped their bounds, but what does it say that they took his passports and now they have to return them? And the other part of that story, of course, as you know, is the fact that you had Norah O'Donnell at CBS reporting falsely that the FBI did not take his passports, and then the rest of the media started, jumping on and retweeting and calling Donald Trump a liar and the rest of it.
Well, I don't like the phrase overreach. I know it's a common term used, but it suggests that, oh, well, maybe they just made a mistake. This was a purposeful fishing expedition, and now we have proof that it was a fishing expedition because you had an FBI agent go in there and vacuum up his passports.
Yeah.
And when you look at the warrant that Judicial Watch was able to get the Justice Department to disclose under public and legal pressure, you see they were basically asking for permission to take any documents they wanted. So they could not only get classified records and presidential records, but any records in the same box of those records and any records around them. I mean, so it was Katie bar the door in terms of what they were able to take. And indeed, the proof is in the pudding. They took material they had no right to have by their own admission.
Tom, it is interesting, too. This whole thing has been sort of like, unpeeling an onion, right? So we find out, the Mar-a-Lago has been raided, and then you hear, oh, he's got classified information and national security is at risk and, nuclear secrets and all of this stuff. And then slowly but surely, as you learn more, it's like this whole thing seems to be unraveling. And I'm just going to give a couple of examples, and then, if you want to comment, that'd be great. But from the time of the grand jury subpoena to the time that they asked for the warrant, and then 2 days after that, they finally do the raid. And so if there was so much danger and our national security was at stake and he had nuclear secrets and all of this, one, why did it take 2 months plus a couple of days for them to get into Mar-a-Lago and get it going on this? That's number one. And number two, you're right. You just said it. Initially, it was all about classified information, but then, thanks to your work, we find out, well, yeah, only one of the points had to do with classified information. The other two, as you just said, it was basically anything that had to do with anything of the presidency of Donald Trump. Or, as you said, even if there was a box of classified information, if there's a box right next to it, then you're going to take that too. It's anything that he had. And so, at least to me, the more that we're finding out, I'm saying it's a long question, I apologize, but when you look at all of this unraveling, the more of this road we go down, the worse it looks for the Justice Department and the FBI.
Well, hasn't that been the case with all the Trump investigations?
Yeah.
Oh, he obstructed justice. He colluded with the Russians, and it turned out, the left that is running these agencies, partisan and left, leaked this information out to suggest that Trump is the worst person in the world, when in fact he's done nothing wrong. It slowly comes out, and the investigations peter out, and some people get caught up in ancillary matters, but in the end, Trump is vindicated. And as importantly, in the end, Trump becomes a crime victim because it becomes clear that there's an abuse of authority here, abuse of power by these agencies to target Trump. And I think that's going to be shown here, that not only is it going to be found that, oh, well, all that noise was just noise, you're going to find that they knew it was noise. And as I said earlier, they knew that these presidential records there was a big dispute as to whether they're presidential records. I would have taken the position, and I take the position because I actually paid attention to what the Justice Department's legal position has been in the past, what the law says, what the U.S. Constitution says, is that the president has really non-reviewable authority to take records with him when he leaves the White House. And the presumption has been that the records that are with him are personal. So to justify a raid in light of that general legal understanding, to me, is the height of dishonesty. And, I think we're going to find, as we had found previously, that the court was defrauded here.
And what's interesting, Tom Fitton joining us, president of Judicial Watch, what's interesting is this whole debate around whether or not the president has the authority to declassify classified documents. And I find it interesting that all the really smart people, like you and others who I pay attention to, they will say the president has absolute authority to declassify documents. And there's people on the other side that are saying, no, the president doesn't have that authority. And I'm a little befuddled by the black and white nature of all of this, because the way that I see it, the president does have that authority. So the people who say that the president does not have that authority, where are they getting that from?
There's no basis for it. You know, the power to classify documents arises from the president's role as commander in chief. So everything kind of flows from his person, and the fact that he's running the executive branch of the government, is in charge, commander in chief, in charge of foreign affairs. Remember, classification is about national security. So of course he has ultimate authority, and it's, as I said, you can't get behind his decisions to release information. For instance, if and destroy information when he sees fit. For instance, if he's on the phone, any president, let's say Joe Biden's on the phone with Macron, and he's taking notes, and Macron says, you know, look, you're probably taking notes. I need you to destroy those notes. Well, those notes that the president has taken are classified. They're presumptively classified. And if Joe Biden says, okay, I'll destroy those notes, he has obviously the right to destroy those notes, because he's engaged in foreign policy making. And so the same goes for President Trump. Any documents he brings in and uses and takes with him, and he says, well, you know, these are personal records. They're not presidential records. I'm making the decision. He can take with him, and the archivist can't second guess him. And when you look at the law that allows the archivist to go and get presidential records, it allows them to go after agencies, not the president.
Interesting.
Because he's the boss. You know, they don't like it. They don't like that Trump was president. And all the powers that a president has, they don't think Trump should be able to exercise. That's what it comes down to. He can't use documents. He can't take them. He can't fire government officials. He can't conduct foreign policy because we don't like him as president. That's the left view. And as a result, he's been victimized in ways never seen before in modern history.
Well, and also remember what, to the left, Donald Trump is an invalid or illegitimate president. They say that Donald Trump is an illegitimate president. Right. So it's that aspect of it, too. And you talked about a fishing expedition. I assume you mean, but I'll ask you to expand on it, but I assume you mean, you know, January 6th isn't landing the way the Democrats want. And so is it your contention that they're fishing for January 6th, maybe to weave some of this into that, maybe some tax issues? I mean, what do you think they're looking for other than anything that's bad for Donald Trump?
I think the last part of your question, anything that's bad for Donald Trump. When you have a warrant that allows them to seize pretty much anything, you know, all bets are off as to what they're looking for. The left has been pressuring Garland and the Justice Department, the activist left, the members of Congress. The President of the United States has been leaking that he's unhappy with Garland's lack of aggressiveness, supposedly against Trump. And so this raid comes out. And, of course, you know, this raid also comes out a week or so after it's disclosed that the FBI had purposely squelched information that was derogatory about both Hunter Biden and Joe Biden just a month or two before the 2020 election. Yep. So the FBI is caught protecting Biden, and I don't think it's a coincidence that a week or so later they engage in this raid. And you know, when you hear the FBI, you have to remember you're thinking it's the DOJ too. The FBI is not an independent agency in the way the government defenders would have you believe. They're a sub-agency of the Justice Department, both of whom report to the President of the United States. So ultimately and constitutionally, Biden's responsible for that infamous raid that took place last week.
So I think this was earlier today. You announced, that a hearing is ordered on August 18th at 1 o'clock in West Palm Beach Division regarding the lawsuit. You, Judicial Watch, and a couple of media outlets as well, requesting the underlying affidavit. Do you think that the judge in the case, knowing what we know about Bruce Reinhart, do you think he'll order that affidavit released? And if he does, the FBI is saying, well, then that thing's going to be so heavily redacted it won't even matter.
Yeah, I think it's going to be heavily redacted. We'll have more information than we otherwise would have had. And, the affidavit, I'm sure they're going to sit on. The reports are they're going to take months to analyze the records they improperly took from Donald Trump. And so they're going to try to drag this out. But in the meantime, we're going to try to get more information. We already have that we arguably would have been able to get as timely if it weren't for Judicial Watch taking the lead and going into court. We have a hearing on Thursday at 1 p.m. down in West Palm Beach on the very issue of whether the underlying affidavit is released. And, to go back to what we were talking about in the beginning, they think they should be able to raid President Trump and former presidents based on secret information that the American people will, practically speaking, never have a right to see in a timely way to make sure things were done on the up and up. And we think the court ought to be very careful and as opposed to what the government wants the court to do, which is just to rubber stamp their position that, we don't want this to interfere with our investigation, so that's the end of it. That isn't the end of it, and that's in one way. That's why the court's having a hearing.
Tom, I appreciate all of these, the answers to all the questions I have. One more, and I don't know if this is something that you actually want to talk about, but is there any way that the FBI, is able to earn back their credibility with, the American people that are paying attention? And a lot of people are saying defund the FBI. I believe that there's a lot of really good people within the FBI, the folks that are trying to, hunt down the human traffickers and the rest of it. But clearly the upper echelon of the FBI, there's a lot of issues there. How does the FBI get back any credibility?
Well, I think the Justice Department and the FBI are irredeemably corrupted and politicized and partisan. It's controlled by ideologues of the left and Democrats, and their decision-making is compromised as a result. And certainly there's law enforcement things that the federal government does that we can debate, whether the Fed should be involved in these law enforcement matters generally, but they're still going to have to be done. And I think we just have to find other agencies to do it, potentially, because I don't think the FBI is going to be changed with a new director. All
right. Tom, thank you very much. I always appreciate having you on WMAL, and have a great rest of week, and good luck with the court proceedings later this week as well.